Hi girls, I'm going to split this chapter into a few videos just to help you understand it. I hope it helps. Ask me any questions along the way. So when we talk about plant reproduction, there's two types. There's asexual reproduction, which means that there's one parent plant and all plants that are the offspring of this one plant are genetically identical to the parent. They are produced through the process of mitosis. Sexual reproduction in plants means that there are two parent plants and that the offspring shows variation, so differences within a population. These gametes for sexual reproduction are produced by meiosis. So the first thing that we need to look at, first diagram that we need to look at is the actual structure of the flowering parts, okay? So you'll know a lot of these already. Well, you'll know the main ones. The brightly coloured pink at the background, they are the petals. So in some plants, you'll see that the petals are brightly coloured. This is because the plant wants to attract insect pollinators. In plants that we have dull colours, like in grasses, we have seeds in grasses as well, but they are not spread by insect pollinators, they are spread by wind pollination, so they don't need to be brightly coloured for the wind. So the bottom part of the flower is the receptacle. This holds everything in place, okay? The sepal, this green part that sticks out from the side, it's usually green. It protects the flower when it's budding before it opens up. The two main parts for plant reproduction are the stamen and the carpel. So the stamen is the male reproductive organ, the full male reproductive organ, and the carpel is the female reproductive organ. I always remember carpel because it sounds like the female name Carmel, and I always remember stamen because it has the word men in it, okay? So that's how I differentiate between the two. So when we look at the structure of the stamen, the male part, sorry, my camera's not really following as I'm talking. So there's two different pieces of the male stamen. We have the top part, which is the anther, and the anther is the part that actually contains the pollen. The filament is this long structure here, and it has vascular bundles in it to bring nutrients and water up to the pollen grains inside the anther. When we look at the female carpel, we have the stigma at the top. Usually this is quite sticky. So what happens is when the pollen is released from the anther, it is brought to the stigma by insects or by wind dispersal, and it sticks to the stigma, the sticky stigma. So try and remember that the stigma is sticky. It usually catches the pollen there. The style is the long tube here. This will have a pollen tube that runs through it that we'll talk about later on in this chapter. So through this style, the pollen tube, the pollen grain will flow through there, will travel through here. This bottom, very swollen part down here is called the ovary. The full thing is called the ovary. Inside the ovary, we have the ovule. Okay. So they are the male and female reproductive parts. Okay, so moving on to my next one. The next part of this course is talking about the formation of gametes. So this is strictly for higher level, okay? You do not need to know this for ordinary level. So it is quite detailed. So bear with me and listen back over these videos if you need to. Okay, so we're going to talk about the male gamete formation first of all. So the anther, which is the top part of the male stamen, contains 4 chambers inside it. Okay, so if I cut the anther transversely, I would see inside that it has 4 hollow tubes inside it, or 4 hollow chambers inside it. In each of these chambers, we find pollen grains inside it, okay? Maturing pollen grains. So when we look at the different layers inside of these 4 chambers, we have the outside, which is the epidermis that we can see from the outside of it, okay? The epidermis obviously is for protection, and the fibrous layer is next. So the fibrous layer and the epidermis together are for protection. Inside these 2 layers, we have the tapetum. Okay, that question is asked sometimes in the exams. What is the tapetum, the function of the tapetum? The function of the tapetum is food storage. So it supplies nourishment to the pollen grains that are developing inside of the anther. Okay, so at this stage now, we have not produced our pollen grains, our mature pollen grains yet. So at this stage, we have what are called the pollen mother cells, which are diploid, all inside these chambers, inside the anther. So how does it mature? How does it become a mature pollen grain? Okay, so just move down a bit. So we start off with what we did have in the chambers here, the pollen mother cells, okay, which were 2N. These are also called the microspore mother cells. So the way I remember microspore is the sperm is a lot smaller than the egg. The pollen is the same. The pollen is a lot smaller than the egg in plant tissue as well. So microspore, micro meaning small, we're talking about the production of the pollen grain, which is the male gamete right now. Okay, so we have the mother microspore here, which is diploid, 2N. So that means that it has 2 sets of chromosomes. This mother cell divides by meiosis twice. So when it divides by meiosis twice, that means that we have 4 haploid cells as a result. These 4 haploid cells are then called a tetrad because they're all stuck together. So these 4 cells are stuck together and they're called a tetrad. They're still not mature yet, okay? So they're all stuck together at this stage. From here, they separate from each other. So they're all N, they're all diploid cells, they're all haploid cells, and they're all stuck together and called a tetrad. Once they separate from each other, they are then called mature microspores. Okay, so they are all still N and they are called the microspores now. At this stage, the microspore, it matures further. Okay, when it matures further, each one of these 4 microspores will go through this stage down here. So when we talk about it going through this stage here, we have the nucleus of the microspore divides again by mitosis to give 2 nuclei. Okay, this is still within the same pollen grain that we have 2 nuclei inside it produced by mitosis. So we still have both of the nuclei are haploid, so 1N. Each of these nuclei, they have a specific function and they have a specific name. So we have the generative nucleus and the tube nucleus. We'll go into further detail about the function of the 2 of those at a later stage, but basically the tube nucleus helps the generative nucleus get to the female gamete, and the generative nucleus is going to fuse with the female gamete. Okay? When we look at the structure of this mature pollen grain, the outside of it has a really, really tough exterior. Okay, the outside layer is called the exine layer. It's really, really tough to help withstand harsh conditions. Then inside this exine layer, we have an intine layer, which is softer. Both functions are for protection. Okay, so that is the overall picture of the male gamete formation. Moving on to female gamete formation. We talked already. we talked already about the actual structure of the female reproductive organ. So we said already that the top was the stigma, the long part here is called the style, and this full bulging unit here is called the ovary. Okay, so this picture here is just an up-close picture of this part here. So when we look at the structure of the ovary, inside we have the integuments that are these two kind of flaps that go around the actual egg cell that's here. The integuments are to protect the female gamete. Inside here, all of these cells are diploid and they are called the nucellus. So the function of the nucellus is for nourishment for the actual egg cell here. The female gamete, okay, I keep saying egg cell, the female gamete is called the megaspore. So when we were talking earlier about the microspore was for the male gamete. The megaspore is for the female gamete. So again, think of actual human reproduction and which one's bigger, the sperm or the egg? The egg is way, way bigger. It's mega. It's bigger. So the female gamete is a lot bigger than the male. Okay, so the megaspore mother cell is here. This megaspore mother cell is diploid, so it's 2N. Okay, so it hasn't matured at this stage when it's 2N because we need it to be haploid for it to be a gamete to be able to fuse with the male pollen grain, which is also haploid. So for the female gamete formation, we start off with the megaspore mother cell, again, which is diploid, okay, which is 2N. This diploid mother cell then divides by meiosis. It divides by meiosis twice to form 4 new haploid cells. 3 of these haploid cells don't go any further. They degenerate, they fall apart, they shrivel up and go away. The one that's left over will then divide by mitosis 3 times. When this divides by mitosis 3 times, we then get a resulting nucleus number of 8 because we have 1 divides once to make 2, those 2 divide once to make 4, and those 4 divide once to make 8. So mitosis happens 3 times and makes 8 nuclei. These 8 nuclei are all held within the embryo sac. So this nucleus divided 8 times inside the embryo sac. So we have 8 altogether here. 5 of these will not have a function in female gamete formation from this point onwards. We only need 3 of these nuclei. 2 of these nuclei are going to be called the polar nuclei. You'll find out more about them at a later stage. The final and remaining one is called the egg cell, and you know the function of that. Okay, so just to look over that again, we start off with the diploid mother cell, which is 2N. That divides twice by meiosis to make 4 haploid daughter cells. 4 of those cells here. 3 of those degenerate, leaving 1 embryo cell left, okay? This 1 embryo sac that is left, the nucleus inside that will divide 3 times by mitosis to make 8 nuclei. 5 of those degenerate, we don't need them anymore. 3 of them are left over. 2 of those 3 become the polar nuclei, and the last remaining one becomes the egg cell, which will fuse with the pollen grain for sexual reproduction in plants. Oh.